So Canadian Blood Services just officially apologized to the LGBTQ2S+ community for its controversial blood donation ban. But does an apology actually mean anything?
Well, it's complicated.
So what is Canadian Blood Services actually apologizing for?
In the mid 1980s, in response to the AIDS crisis, their predecessor, Canadian Red Cross Blood Transfusion Service, introduced new rules that banned any man who had had sex with men and some trans people from donating blood and plasma. And while this policy was grounded in concerns around AIDS transmission, banning an entire community from donating was overblown and discriminatory and unfairly suggested that a person's blood was somehow less safe or less clean due to their gender or who they slept with. And it wasn't until the 2010s that policy started to get rolled back. First with a 5-year and then a 1-year and then eventually a 3-month waiting period required between having sex and donating. Obviously, that meant a lot of queer men were still effectively banned from donating. Then, in September 2022, the agency removed criteria specific to men who have sex with men, and now they screen donors all based on sexual behavior, regardless of their gender or their sexual orientation. And that was seen as a huge win for the community after years of advocates pushing for these changes.
The current approach was discriminatory and wrong. This is a significant milestone in moving forward on both the safety of our blood supply, but also non-discriminatory practices.
But the system isn't magically perfect with those changes in this apology, right? Like, they even admitted that their work isn't done when it comes to making blood donation more accessible for everybody in Canada.
Lots of people still face barriers to donating. People who do sex work, for example, are still asked to delay their donations until a period where they haven't engaged in sex work. If poly people have multiple partners and have anal sex with at least one partner, they're also asked to delay, even if those partners aren't new. We also see things like people who use PrEP or who have an HIV positive partner. They need to delay their donating regardless of their HIV status. And obviously asking people not to work or not to sleep with their partners isn't super realistic, and it means that ultimately people forego donating altogether. We also see things like when trans people go to donate blood, they can only register using the names listed on their legal IDs. And non-binary donors are also still required to choose a binary sex designation when they're donating because CBS's computer system still doesn't include gender-neutral markers.
And of course, queer people aren't the only ones who've been barred from donating blood in the past, right?
African and Caribbean communities have also historically faced barriers or been outright barred from donating. And we did ask whether these communities would receive a formal apology like queer folks just did. But Canadian Blood Services said they're still working on adapting existing policies around those communities and that there are no immediate plans for a formal apology. Of course, there are also plenty of queer and trans folks who are African, Caribbean, and Black, so this is something that affects queer people too.
So why is an apology like this important?
Beyond being a human rights issue, discriminatory policies have 100% discouraged people from becoming blood donors. Canada's blood supply has a dangerously low number of Black donors, for example, because of the factors we just talked about. And if Canadian Blood Services wants people to donate, those people need to trust that they will be respected in the process. So really, apologizing is one step in acknowledging the historical harms that have been committed, and that's a big factor in starting to rebuild the trust that these organizations need with marginalized communities.